Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are diving into a shocking global turning point that stunned military analysts, world leaders, and everyday people across the globe. Ukraine shocks the world as Crimea is fully retaken, and what happened next is something no one saw coming. For years, Crimea stood as one of the most contested and symbolic regions in modern warfare. Taken by Russia in 2014 and heavily fortified ever since. Many experts believed it was impossible to retake, calling it a military fortress that could survive any assault. But history changed when Ukraine launched a complex, multi-layered campaign that flipped the entire strategic balance in Eastern Europe. The story begins quietly, not with explosions, but with silence. For weeks, Russian forces in Crimea experienced strange disruptions. Communications began to fail, satellite links were unstable, supply convoys were delayed mysteriously. At first, these were dismissed as technical glitches, but in reality, Ukraine was laying the foundation of one of the most sophisticated operations of the modern era. Electronic warfare units were quietly activated, targeting Russian radar systems and command networks. This phase wasn't about brute force, it was about invisible dominance. Under cover of darkness, Ukrainian special forces began inserting themselves into key coastal and infrastructure zones. They used fast boats and low-flying drones, avoiding radar detection and using GPS, jamming countermeasures. These units didn't attack immediately. Instead, they observed, mapped, tagged, and prepared. Every ammunition depot, fuel storage site, radar station, and command bunker was quietly logged. The battlefield was being shaped long before the first missile was fired. At the same time, Ukraine unleashed a cyber campaign that remains classified in many details even today. Military servers linked to Russian logistics began projecting false data. Troop movements were misreported. Fuel supplies were marked as delivered when they weren't. Commanders trusted screens that were lying to them. This digital fog created an environment where Russian forces were blind but didn't realize it. Then the real shock began. In the early hours of a cold morning, precision strikes hit key Russian targets across Crimea. Bridges, ammunition depots, air defense systems, and communication towers were hit almost simultaneously. It wasn't random destruction, it was surgical. Ukrainian drones and long-range missile systems worked in perfect coordination, eliminating critical nodes rather than wasting firepower. Within hours, the so-called impenetrable Russian defense grid began collapsing. The Kerch Bridge, the symbolic lifeline connecting Crimea to Russia, became the turning point. Multiple coordinated strikes severely damaged logistical routes. With limited ability to move heavy equipment and reinforcements, Russian units inside Crimea became isolated. Fuel shortages grew, ammunition was rationed, food supplies became uncertain, morale began to break. On the ground, Ukrainian mechanized brigades moved with speed that surprised everyone. Instead of slow frontal assaults, they used fast, flexible advances supported by drones constantly feeding real-time data to commanders. Tanks and armored vehicles moved through less expected routes, bypassing strongholds and targeting weak points. Towns that were expected to take weeks to capture fell in days. Urban warfare in Crimea became a psychological battle. Loudspeakers broadcast messages urging Russian troops to surrender. Leaflets were dropped assuring fair treatment under international law. Social media filled with real-time videos showing Ukrainian flags rising over strategic buildings. Each video weakened Russian confidence further. Soldiers began surrendering in groups rather than fighting to the last. International reaction was immediate. Western governments, who had been cautiously supportive, suddenly faced a new reality. This wasn't just a defensive war anymore. It was a reversal of history. Emergency meetings were held across Europe and North America. Analysts debated whether this would trigger further escalation or finally push Russia toward negotiations. Inside Russia, the news hit like an earthquake. State media tried to suppress the scale of the situation, calling it temporary tactical withdrawals, but information leaked through social channels. Families of soldiers demanded answers. Protests, though controlled, began appearing in major cities. The myth of military invincibility was cracking. As Ukrainian forces tightened their control, key ports like Sevastopol changed hands. This was monumental. Sevastopol had been the heart of Russian naval power in the Black Sea. Losing it shifted naval dominance in the region almost overnight. Ships withdrew or were captured, and naval bases were dismantled or secured. What shocked analysts the most wasn't just that Crimea was retaken, but how fast it happened. The operation wasn't chaotic, it was controlled, disciplined, and synchronized. Ukrainian command demonstrated a level of modern warfare mastery that forced military academies worldwide to rewrite their case studies. Behind the scenes, diplomacy ran non-stop. While boots were on the ground, back-channel talks were happening quietly. Neutral countries worked as mediators. The global economy trembled as oil and gas markets reacted to the new instability. Stock markets swung wildly, while investors tried to predict what the next phase would be. Civilians in Crimea experienced a wave of conflicting emotions. Some celebrated, others feared instability. But many shared stories of relief that active fighting was coming to an end. Ukrainian authorities moved quickly to restore basic services, electricity, hospitals, and water supplies. This wasn't just military victory, it was a race to stabilize life. A powerful psychological shift occurred in Ukrainian society. For years, the nation had lived under the shadow of loss and occupation. Now, streets filled with people waving flags, crying openly, embracing strangers. Soldiers became heroes not for destruction, but for restoration. Russian military doctrine itself began facing internal crisis. Senior officers questioned outdated tactics. The world began to see cracks inside what was once considered a rigid and unbreakable war machine. International military journals started publishing early assessments describing the operation as a blueprint for 21st century hybrid warfare. But was it really over? Experts remained cautious. Retaking territory is one thing, holding it is another. Ukrainian defense systems were quickly deployed. Anti-aircraft batteries, drone surveillance grids, and reinforced infantry positions were established across the region. The world now watched with a mixture of awe and fear. Awe at the precision and determination shown by Ukraine. Fear of what a cornered nuclear power might do next. Every diplomatic call, every military movement, every radar blip became front-page news. As days turned into weeks, it became clear that this moment would be written in history books. A moment when assumptions were shattered. When a nation many had underestimated rewrote the rules of modern conflict. When Crimea, once declared lost forever, was reclaimed through strategy, patience, and sacrifice. And this changes everything. It changes the future of the war. It changes the balance of power. It changes how the world views resistance, occupation, and sovereignty. Ukraine didn't just retake land. It reclaimed narrative, dignity, and inspiration. So the question the world asks now is simple but terrifying. If this could happen, what else is possible? What other impossible scenarios are closer to reality than we think? And as the dust settles over Crimea, one truth becomes unavoidable. The world will never look at this conflict the same way again. Because when Ukraine retook Crimea, it didn't just